Okay, in this episode we're dealing with Chapter 4 of David McCullough's book, 1776. So we're about at the halfway point. Chapters 4 and 5 of this book make up Part 2, the middle section of the book, and Part 2 is referred to as The Fateful Summer, is the way McCullough entitled it. And what you have here in Chapter 4 is a section that he called The Lines Are Drawn, and it's going to deal with the fortifications and the British moving into the city of New York. America, the Patriots prepare for that, knowing that the British fleet is going to arrive. This chapter has three parts to it, just like most of the chapters that you deal with, and it picks up right where the last chapter left off. You have the New England troops after their victory at Boston, with some troops from Virginia that begin to move south now toward the city of New York. A couple of things that you need to know about New York to make sense of this campaign. New York was full of loyalists, Americans that were loyal to the British Crown. Boston had some loyalists, but nothing compared to New York. So that's going to be a major hindrance to the Americans. The other thing that you ought to know about New York City, and I would encourage you to look at the maps in the book as well as the maps that I put on the PowerPoint that's on RenWeb, is that New York City is very much defined by water. It sits on the Atlantic Ocean. You have the East River, you have the Hudson River, etc., made up of a number of islands and peninsulas, New York and the surrounding area. So the geography is key there, and really when you get right down to it, McCullough is going to conclude that Washington and the Patriots had no business trying to fight here in New York. It was kind of a foregone conclusion since control of the seas was going to be so critical. The Americans have no navy, the British have a very powerful navy, that they shouldn't have even done this. But Washington believed politically that he had to defend New York. How do you simply just let a very powerful city surrender or allow the British to move in without putting up a fight? Wouldn't have been very popular in America, so they're going to put up some defense there. So the Americans arrive, they begin to build defenses. Lord Stirling is the man who is responsible for a lot of the defenses that are built as they place cannon. Knox places cannon up and down the Hudson and the East River. Forts are built on each side of those rivers and at key points as they try to fortify for the British arrival. Another thing that's mentioned in Part 1 is just a little bit about the city itself. That city, as Knox said, was a very pleasant city, liked the city itself, but didn't like the people, referred to those nasty Tories, wasn't very pleased with them at all. And there's also a pretty interesting section in this book of a Lieutenant Isaac Bangs, who kept a diary when he traveled throughout New York City of what he saw: 20 churches, the number of different denominations, and the spiritual impact in New York. But he went on to visit other parts of New York City that were a good bit more seedy. One of those had the ironic name of the Holy Ground because it was land that was owned by a church, but it certainly wasn't holy in the sense that we might think of it. It was known for prostitutes and brothels and violence, and American soldiers, when they went there, often got in trouble. You have a number of deaths that take place from fights. Venereal disease, syphilis was rampant in this area. So you get a pretty good snapshot of what life was like for the soldiers in that city, both the good and the bad. Part 1 also deals with, as I mentioned, just building the defenses there at New York. And just to remind you, the development of the character in this book, Charles Lee, who was second in command to George Washington, comes out again in this chapter. Lee believed that for the Americans to defend New York, that fortifications had to be built. They're not going to work, though. Now, when Washington and the Patriots lose at New York, Lee's going to be very critical of Washington. He's going to think that he needs to be removed from command. But Charles Lee was a little less than genuine. He too thought that New York could be defended. Everybody was wrong, including him. It develops in this section of chapter 4 that Knox and Greene were becoming very good friends. Both of them write letters to Congress trying to encourage Congress to send more money and supplies to the Patriots. That's part 1 of chapter 4. Part 2 picks up from there, and you have more bad news that Washington receives from Canada. Things were just not going well with that campaign, and it'll ultimately just fizzle out as it was a total failure. Part 2 also explains that there was a loyalist plot to assassinate George Washington. Fortunately, it was uncovered. They didn't find all of the people that were involved. They did find that a Thomas Hickey, who was a businessman in New York City, appeared to be one of the ringleaders. He was arrested and put on trial for treason, and he was hung for trying to be involved in this conspiracy. These events in chapter 4 are happening in late June and on into early July of 1776. So McCullough weaves in there at times the story of what's taking place in Philadelphia, which will culminate in the writing of the Declaration of Independence, which is when it's signed on July the 4th. News of it and eventually a copy of the document itself will reach New York City. It's read to the soldiers, the American soldiers, and their morale increases greatly as a result of that. But you have the arrival of the British fleet. The first 2 ships that arrived were the Phoenix and the Rose, fairly powerful ships. They sail into the Hudson River. The American forts, the batteries on both sides of the river, open fire on these ships, but they do no damage at all. And the British ships just can kind of sail up and down the river at their own will. Should have been a sign that this Battle of New York is not going to go very well. An American cannon exploded and killed some Patriot soldiers, but no damage to the British fleet, which is just going to come day after day, one ship after the other, more and more men, until eventually you have a force of 14,000 soldiers that arrive, then more and more. 8,000 or so of those were Hessian soldiers, these German soldiers for hire, supposedly the best fighters that the world knew at the time. This is going to be the largest army, foreign army, that has ever owned American soil. Of course, in the Civil War, you have armies that are larger than that, but both sides, technically, I suppose, were American. But this is the largest foreign force ever on our soil. So you have Lord Richard Howe that shows up on the HMS Eagle, and that kind of brings an end to part 2, just with the arrival of the British Navy and, of course, soldiers on board. So you move into part 3, and what you have happening in part 3 is just showing that the British morale, their confidence was very high at this point, and it should have been. They had superior power, but what McCullough indicates, as he'll do throughout this book, is that the British back off. They believe that the Patriots didn't have much resolve to fight, so instead of using their superior forces to deliver kind of a knockout blow, they wait and allow the Patriots to buy time again and again and again. And that kind of happens here. No straight attack here. So just delay after delay. Howe actually sent a letter to George Washington suggesting that he surrender. He said he would give Washington a full pardon if he would do so. When he sent that letter to Washington, he addressed it to Mr. Washington. Washington wouldn't have anything to do with it. I'm not Mr. Washington. It was a show of disrespect. I'm General Washington. They wouldn't recognize his military credentials, so Washington ignored it until finally they addressed it appropriately. He met with a British commander. He said, I'm not going to pardon. Why do I need a pardon? I'm not going to accept your pardon. There's no fault, so there's no pardon. We're going to continue to fight. Bold words, very powerful words there. His men and his commanders were impressed, but they're in a very, very weak position at New York, so ultimately it's not going to do them just a whole lot of good. So summer moves on into July and August. More and more British ships and soldiers are arriving, and they begin to station themselves on Staten Island, the southern part of New York Harbor, and begin to decide when and where they're going to attack. Washington believed that their major attack was going to be at New York itself, on Manhattan or York Island, instead of on Long Island. He wasn't sure. He thought any attack on Long Island was going to be a feint attack, and that the major assault would come on the city itself. So Washington, kind of grasping at straws, reeling, splits his army, put some of them on Long Island, some of them at New York. Well, the British decided, as Chapter 4 comes to an end, that their major attack is going to be on Long Island. Washington was actually given a heads up about that and kind of ignored it. He's reeling. He doesn't know what he's really doing here. You don't think of Washington being in that predicament, but he certainly was at this point. And Chapter 4 kind of comes to an end kind of on a foreboding note that Washington and the Americans really don't know what's fixing to happen to them. And we're going to find out in Chapter 5 it wasn't very good at all. And on top of all of that, his leading general that he trusted a lot, Nathaniel Greene, was sick and is going to be totally out of the mix for the rest of the New York campaign, and a lot of folks thought that that was particularly critical. So it sets the stage for what's going to happen with the Battle of New York in Chapter 5, and just prepare for the worst, because the Americans are going to get whooped pretty good there. We'll deal with that on Episode 5.